We have some interceptor.
They quickly saw the pilot was slumped over and unresponsive as his plane continued flying into Virginia, where it crashed, having traveled 300 miles without radio communication. The NTSB is considering whether a sudden loss of cabin air pressure could have incapacitated everyone on board. Just as golf legend Payne Stewart and 5 others were killed in 1999 when their plane lost cabin pressure, then crashed in South Dakota.
What do you think happened? Hypoxia?
Hypoxia.
Followed by a heart attack?
What did you say?
Heart attack. So he couldn't have been that high.
You said just before kick.
Oh, really? Oh.
It could actually have been hypoxia. However, I did see a.
Well, sure, that was the turning around.
Yeah, that's why.
The hypoxia was the turning around because he was like losing his marbles, and then something more dramatic happened.
There is a really good I won't say post-mortem on this by an aviator who used to fly the 500s. And he has put forward the idea, and I actually think it's a very, very good idea, that it wasn't hypoxia, that it was actually some sort of significant event that caused the pilot to die at the controls, or at least be rendered unconscious, and everyone else on board would have been alive. Now, everyone thinks it's hypoxia because that has happened before, but he was given instructions to climb to flight level 340, that's a level out first at 280, and then continue to climb to 34. And as the plane was climbing, air traffic control asked him to level out at 330 because of other traffic, but he didn't. There was no response. So he had dialed up those altitudes into the flight management system, and the aircraft was flying up to that level. That happened back in Tennessee. Okay, so only 15 minutes after departure. Actually, it would have been over North Carolina, I think. The autopilot will take you on a predetermined route and then set you up for a final approach to the duty runway at the destination. That's why I did that turn. And it just so happens that that turn and that duty runway is lined up directly with the return leg. So if he was unconscious or dead at the controls, the autopilot flew the aircraft and lined it up on finals at 34,000 feet, flight level 340. And then as soon as it flew over the destination, it would have just gone straight on to the next destination, which was back in Tennessee, which was actually on a straight line from Islip, which was the destination, over Washington, DC, towards Tennessee. But it ran out of fuel over Virginia. Right engine failed first, and the aircraft was seen to go into a right-hand spiral dive.
Right.
The F-16s that caught up to it 2 minutes before it started its dive. So they just got there just in time. They saw the pilot slumped over, so he was in the left-hand seat, but he was slumped over to the right. If they had deep pressurization, the moisture inside would have actually accreted onto the windows, and you would have seen some ice. Lowering pressure means lowering temperature, and also at that altitude. And they said all the windows were perfectly clear, except all the shades were down in the back. And because that woman in the back there, she had been adopted by a very, very rich couple at the age of 48 years ago. 40.
What?
She was adopted by them as a daughter. Now, they were also big contributors to Trump because they were in Florida. So the conspiracy theorists came out thinking that it might have actually been an assassination, thinking that they were trying to kill this very, very wealthy couple, their older couple. Now, they had adopted this woman because they reminded them of their daughter who had died in a scuba diving accident.
God.
Now, she was a realtor, but she had never been on this jet before, except once before. So she was in Tennessee and getting back to Long Island, where she and her 2-year-old daughter lived in one of the couple's houses in the Hamptons.
Wow.
So she was been in the back there with the nanny, shades down, had no idea what was going on. They didn't know the pilot. Now the pilot, this is the key thing, he had 34,000 hours.
34,000.
because he was an ex-airline pilot who was just pushing 70 years old.
Jesus.
So why am I bringing this up? It's because we did the thing on hypoxia. People think it's hypoxia, the media says hypoxia, everyone's saying hypoxia, but this other guy goes, well, hang on. No, this guy was an expert. He was a commercial pilot. He was also a trainer on cabin pressure systems. So he knew how to operate cabin pressure system. And if they did have a loss of pressure, he would have had at least 15 to 30 seconds knowing that they had loss of pressure, and he would have actually been able to put on a mask. And he didn't. So the reason I bring this up is one of the key reasons for pilot death at the controls is heart conditions, but the number one reason for pilot incapacitation is gastro problems. So when you're out in the field and you are working your systems, when you have that counter lunch at the local pub, please be careful, because you are more likely to have to terminate your mission because of having a gastro problem. Young fit guy like you, heart problems highly unlikely, but you are more likely to have a stomach upset of some description that's going to cause the mission to fail. Blood pressure, okay, measure of between when the heart is squeezing and contracting and the normal pressure within the system. It's measured as a ratio of 120 when you're contracting and 80 when the system is not under pressure. That's the normal pressure within the blood vessel system. Hypertension is when the pressure is too high. Hypotension is when the pressure is too low. Heart disease is the biggest killer of pilots. Actually, that's not true. The biggest killer of pilots is arrogant behaviour leading to violations.
Right.
But if it's going to be a medical related incident, then the killer is going to be atherosclerosis, which is going to be some sort of disease related to the heart and to the arteries. So an angioplasty is a way to open up a semi-blocked artery. So high blood pressure causes the walls of the arteries and the blood vessels to become weaker, but also a build-up of plaque can cause a blockage. So you put down the thing called a stent. It's got a little wire, little cage there, opens it up, pull the stent out, and that stays there and keeps the artery open. It's not unusual in older, especially men, older men that have had a rough life, ridden hard and put to bed wet. Blood sugar, hypoglycemia, means low glucose levels below 70 milligrams per 100 millilitres of blood. Remember, glucose is required for metabolism, so that's that energy. If you have hypoglycemia, lack of sugar, symptoms are hunger and lethargy. Missing meals, not enough carbs, or unexpected strenuous exercise can cause hypoglycemia. Again, another thing, especially when you're out doing a remote job and not eating properly, can cause that hypoglycemia, which can cause lethargy. And of course, diabetes, that's a lack of insulin or low levels of insulin. The only reason I bring this up is because it's part of the syllabus recommended by CASA. But let's get on to the nervous system. Now, I'm currently putting in a claim for bad back from helicopter flying. How's your back going?
It's not great, especially my lower back.
Yes. You can always tell what sort of helicopter you fly by where the back pain is. So the Huey pilots, because they've got a twin rotor system, usually have higher up, but if you've got 3 or 4 bladed rotor systems, it's lower down. And part of the reason for that is helicopters normally fly nose low. And so as you're sitting in the seat, you're actually slightly forward. You've got a helmet on, which is heavier, which means the fulcrum point is right there on the neck. And you also got the vibration. So you've got your vibration going up and down, and the fulcrum point for high frequency, low amplitude, so that's 3 or 4 bladed systems, is lower down, but low frequency, high amplitude, such as Hueys, is higher up. And so for people that fly systems like us, you're going to get, especially L3, L4, L5, that area there is where you're going to have your problems. Where's your problem?
Exactly.
L3, L4?
Exactly there we
Right.
pointed.
Same with me.
Yeah.
And mine is also neck from night vision goggles. So I've got a cervical spondylosis because of that. Truck driving, guaranteed to get bad back. So how's your back after a big drive?
Yeah, it's
terrible.
Yeah.
After 2 days,
Yeah.
it's pretty sore after 2 days, and then it seems to come good actually the longer you go. But yeah, after a couple of days solid, it's very painful actually.
So they say that probably about 70 to 80% of helicopter pilots will end up with a bad back, but almost 100% of truck drivers will get a bad back, especially long distance.
Yeah.
So the key thing there is to understand what's causing it and B, take those mitigations. So especially trying to strengthen core muscles and maybe look at a career change before you get too crippled later on.
Hey, now.
But not until...
Okay, so we're all leaving. Thank you very much, Conway. That was a wonderful day. Wonderful, good. Okay, we're all leaving.
Or start getting VTOL aircraft.
Is there a four-bladed? Yes.
Oh no, then it moves even further down.
Yeah.
So that's a high frequency, lower amplitude. But the other thing is just be aware of it and then do appropriate exercises to help relieve the issues.
Yes.
Yeah. Now the other thing is that all those wonderful little neurons, they all sort of feed that system. They go up through the central part of the spine, through the central nervous system. But they all come in through the entrances into the central nervous system between the vertebrae. So if you do have a back problem or a crushed vertebra, depending on where it is in the spine will dictate what other part of the body. My wife was in a chopper crash in Timor. She got compression wedge fracture at L3, which is where the left leg nerves go. So she's got numbness in her left leg and weakened sensation in her left leg because of that. There we go, there's an example. So we have these nerve roots coming out from between the vertebra, and in between the vertebra we have the intervertebral disc. Now as we age, that disc becomes less supple, more stiff, and more likely to become bulged, what they call herniated. So a herniated disc can cause a significant amount of pain. Right, we already talked about the nervous system, so I won't do that one. But here we go. Let's go into biochemistry. Does anyone know what prolactin is? Anyone ever heard of it? Okay, the word lactate. Okay, because it's got to do with milk production. It's actually a hormone. So it's a biochemical that is partially responsible for milk letdown in women. That's why it's called prolactin. But in men, it's actually produced when there is an increase in dopamine will stop prolactin, but then when the dopamine finishes, prolactin will become a bit of a surge. Now, a lot of people ask, how long does it take for neurotransmitters to work? Well, neurotransmitters like the speed of light. But depending on where the biochemical was made will determine if it's a neurotransmitter or if it's a hormone. So hormones are normally produced in organs. Neurotransmitters are produced in neurons. Sometimes they're exactly the same chemical, but they will have a different effect. And people say, well, then how long does it take for a hormone to go through the body? Does anyone want to hazard a guess? All right, here we go, because we're all guys. Prolactin is also responsible for helping people to sleep. After ejaculation, dopamine ceases, prolactin increases, and then you have the urge to sleep. How long does it take after ejaculation before you want to have a sleep? There's an example of how long it takes hormones to go around through the body.
Minus 20 seconds.
So when she wants to cuddle and talk, it's because she doesn't have that prolactin surge that men do after ejaculation. Okay. So when you don't want to cuddle
So
and
it's
talk,
scientific.
exactly.
It's not
just because you want to.
That's right. It's not toxic masculinity at all.
Yeah.
And another example is if all of a sudden you hear a really loud noise, how long does it take for your heart to start racing? Immediately.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a neurotransmitter and then the hormone of adrenaline. Okay. So it goes through the bloodstream within a second. So there's an example of how biochemicals can actually change the way that we act from a physiological as well as an emotional perspective. So hormones are also responsible for our emotions. So let's have a look at some of the biochemicals that are interesting for us. But it's also interesting to know this because when we want to know what some people are more emotional than others, it's actually to do with chemicals and chemical imbalances. So chemicals that are exuded by neurons and neurotransmitters, parts of the brain are called neuromodulators, and by other organs, hormones. And quite often they're exactly the same chemical, but they are produced in different parts of the body. They cause a response in the central or the peripheral nervous systems, either physiologically or emotionally. And a normal state of biochemistry is called homeostasis. It's homeostatic. When it is not homeostatic, it's an abnormal state. And there's a disproportionate amount of neurotransmitters or mimics to neurotransmitters. So my ex-girlfriend used to suffer from PMS. She was a really nice person, so she would never get angry, but she would get weepy. And it was regular as clockwork. Every 4 weeks, there would be a couple of days where she'd become very emotional and weepy. And otherwise, she was completely normal, but it was all hormone related. So the emotions were related to the hormone release. Women have a lot more hormone releases than men. Here are some key biochemicals. So adrenaline and noradrenaline, known as epinephrine in North America. Dopamine is our pleasure neurotransmitter. When we do something that's really nice and unexpected, dopamine is produced. Dopamine can become very addictive, especially when you're using, say, illicit drugs or alcohol. Dopamine increases the urge to repeat the action or repeat the behaviour. GABA. Gamma aminobutyric acid. It calms you down. It reduces the effect of neurotransmitters. And glutamate. Remember Chinese food used to have monosodium glutamate?
Mm-hmm.
What did monosodium glutamate do to the flavour?
It increased the
made it
flavour.
amazing.
Yeah, it made it amazing.
Yes.
Yes.
It actually didn't change the flavour at all.
No.
It changed the sensitivity in our neurons. So the flavour was not changed at all by the MSG. It made our ability to detect the flavours much more powerful, because glutamate increases the sensitivity of our neurons, and monosodium glutamate is just the way that you can sprinkle it in there.
Yeah.
So, and
That's
endorphins.
smart. That's smart.
Yeah. Now the problem is MSG should actually still be allowed in food.
It puts you to sleep.
If people who are reactive to MSG can actually have a bad reaction, yeah, and people with sensitivities, they then can become lethargic.
Yeah.
But if you're not, then there's nothing wrong with it. In the normal sort of doses, there's nothing wrong with MSG. But they've done a blanket ban because there are a few people that are highly sensitive to it.
Right.
Yeah. So if you can get it at the supermarket, just chuck it in your food. All of a sudden overnight, you should be on MasterChef.
You can still buy it.
You can still buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can still buy it.
Aromat, yeah.
Aromat is MSG.
MSG.
Yeah.
Almost pure MSG.
What's that one?
Yeah.
Huh?
It's called aromat. It's a spice.
Ah, okay. I've never heard of that. I'll have to check that out.
If in Japan, every bowl of ramen.
Yeah, it's MSG. Yeah. Tomatoes,
Yeah.
MSG, seaweed, oysters.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that there was regular in Japan.
Yeah, it's natural.
Yeah, okay. So here we go. There's the old neuron again, and there is your presynaptic axon terminal. And you can see these little neurotransmitters are coming out, and they're being gathered up by these receptors. So some chemicals can actually mimic what a neuroreceptor does. Now when you have alcohol, there are 2 chemicals that come with drinking alcohol. One of them is GABA, so that reduces your inhibitions. And so you think, oh, that's okay, I'll go up to her and have a chat to her. I wouldn't talk to her normally when I'm sober, but I'm pretty mellow right now, so 10 foot tall and bulletproof and everything I say is interesting. I'll go and have a chat to her. But it also releases dopamine, so you get that pleasure from drinking. And so when you become an alcoholic, you have changes to your chemicals. You have decreased GABA. Is it decreased GABA? So the alcohol actually mimics the GABA, and then you get the increase in dopamine because your body actually creates the dopamine. That's why you become addicted to alcohol. Speaking of alcohol, reaches the brain in 5 minutes and inhibits the messaging by exciting GABA, which inhibits everything, and reduces brain activity. And that's why we become dopey when we've been drinking.